Good evening and welcome to our COVID-19 update. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Here are the highlights at this hour. Civil servants resume work in Kaduna State after 3 months of staying at home owing to COVID-19. Jigawa State government says its schools will remain closed, while the Ogun State government asks striking doctors in their isolation centers to show understanding and return to work. And a good day for scientists in the battle against COVID-19, as several vaccines prove promising against COVID-19. Civil servants in Kaduna State resumed work today following the directive of the state government after a 4-month stay-at-home order as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The main gate of the Secretariat in Kaduna City, which had been shut following the closure of the complex on March the 26th, was reopened for activities this Monday.
For the first time in over 3 months, many civil servants in Kaduna State resumed work after stringent measures were imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19 virus. Offices come back to life as workers, mostly those in senior cadre, settle down on their duty posts. A circular from the Office of the Head of Service over the weekend directed senior civil servants within the ranks of permanent secretaries and chief executive of agencies and parastatals to work from Mondays to Fridays, while officers on grade level 14 and above are expected to be at work 3 times a week. With this resumption, workers are expected to abide strictly with necessary guidelines, with restrictions on influx of visitors except with absolute necessity.
But we will strictly apply the guidelines for continuation of our work. That is ensuring that before anybody comes in, one, we have to actually restrict visitors. Unless it is absolutely necessary, we will not allow any visitors to come to the offices.
Some of the workers expressed happiness over their resumption, while promising to be more committed so as to cover up lost grounds.
The courts have started sitting. The High Court have started taking very, very important cases that have time limit, and fundamental right enforcement procedures, application for bail, and so on and so forth. So I think the ground is running. We are expected to recover all the lost ground within a few weeks, by the grace of God, that happened during the lockdown.
Governor Nasser El-Rufai had last month approved the gradual easing of the lockdown measures with the reopening of places of worship, hotels, and some other private businesses, while schools and markets are to remain shut.
Staying in northern Nigeria, while some states have begun preparations for school resumption, the Jigawa State government says its schools will remain closed until further notice. The state's Commissioner for Education, Lawal Denzomo, confirmed this to Channels Television at the State House in Dutse.
It's been over a month since the Jigawa State government eased all phases of lockdown in towns affected by COVID-19 in the state. In Dutse, the state capital, activities have resumed in earnest after months of lockdown. Markets now operate at its full capacity while the schools remain closed. Grasses have even taken over the school premises and classrooms are devoid of usual chores and rhymes. Children at home play with their peers, not minding any measure to protect themselves from the coronavirus. However, parents expressed their deep concern over the situation.
We do hope it will federal government will swing into action by giving the necessary directives for the reopening of schools, because keeping the schools closed, we parents were not happy because it stuck the future prospect of our children. So we do hope the schools will be open immediately for full resumption of academic activities.
Opinion is that the government should please help parents consider the issue of going back to school of our children, because even the most heated countries that are most affected by the COVID-19 have gone back to school. The only thing is that we should observe the preventive measures of wearing the face masks, washing our hands using the sanitizers, and observing distances.
The state government on its part believes it is not the right time to allow children back to school because of safety concerns.
In Jigawa State, we're trying to also coordinate ourselves to see falling back on the decision of the federal government based on the instructions given and the protocols laid down by the NDCDC and the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 to harmonize what we feel we can do before we finally agree to open our schools. Our children are so vulnerable that we have to be very extra careful before we ask them to come back to school so that we make sure they are fully safe, protected, and covered.
When would that be, sir?
Well, it's a matter of decision. I cannot say today or tomorrow. Only God knows.
With the effort of the state government to curb the spread of the coronavirus through children, it is the expectation of parents that pupils will get an alternate method of learning without having to sit together in a classroom.
Meanwhile, stakeholders in both government and the private sector in Yobe State have welcomed the federal government's proposed guidelines ahead of schools' possible reopening. They caution, however, that school owners should not increase fees as a measure to meet up with the safety protocols enshrined in the guidelines, saying all have economically been affected by COVID-19.
It's the second time in 8 years that schools are forcibly shut in Yobe State, the first being between 2012 and 2014, when the Boko Haram insurgency was at its peak, leading to the death of several teachers and students. Now, students in Yobe State are amongst others across the country that have been shut down owing to the coronavirus pandemic. Although most of the residents are in support of the proposed guidelines for the reopening of schools, they caution against increase in fees.
I'm calling on the private school owners or the owner or those in the private partnership to consider the situation of the people in the country to ensure that, yes, they did not increase the school fees, and the federal government and the state government should come into their aid so that they will give them relief or palliatives as they did to the general public, so that they will not increase the amount of their school, they will not put much pressure on the citizens, so that easily the country will return back to the normal position.
Some of the areas in the country, I think they cannot strictly adhere to these guidelines, more especially here in the Northeast. There are so many issues as a result of this insurgency, and when this guideline is brought, it incurs another issues on it, because even the government the state government that declares state of emergency on education, it has to put so many things in place.
School owners in Yobe State welcome the compulsory compliance with safety protocols as reopening conditions.
You know, before then, we have been hearing about these guidelines, and some of our people have already started preparing for these guidelines. And in the area where we are not going to make it, we are sure we are going to meet with the Honorable Commissioner, Minister of Education.
No doubt, compliance with guidelines will help to flatten the curve of the pandemic spread. The state government, however, will need to support the provision of the basic safety kit needed for pupils returning to schools.
Down south to Ogun State, where the government there has appealed to striking resident doctors at the Shagamu Isolation Center to reverse their decision over the withdrawal of their services in the interest of the public. The state's Commissioner for Health, Dr. Tomi Koka, gave the appeal, saying that only 2 members of the Association of Resident Doctors withdrew their services from the state government isolation center. She assures residents of quality service delivery as the vacuum created by the resident doctors has been filled by other volunteers.
I believe that the striking doctors had 5 requests, and we've actually addressed 3 out of the 5 requests. And the other 2 requests that they're asking for, there is one which is the minimum wage, which the entire state all the workers in the state, we've agreed a minimum wage with them. So we expect that the doctors as well will fall within that group. The other outstanding issue is that of what they call appropriate remuneration, in which case they're requesting for their salaries to be, the entry point to be moved up from Commerce 2.2 to Commerce 3.2. And that situation requires a lot of financial burden on the state. We need to carefully assess it as a state, and it doesn't, until we look at our IGR and the cost implication, financial implication to the state, we cannot make any commitment, particularly in this season where globally there's a financial downturn. So we are appealing to the doctors to actually be, considerate in looking at the entire situation.
Ogun State Commissioner for Health, Dr. Tomi Coker. The number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Nigeria is on its way to hitting 37,000, as 556 new cases of the virus were announced in the last 24 hours, and that brings the number to 36,663. More recoveries have also been recorded, putting the total number of patients discharged at 15,105, while the death toll is now 789. As it stands, the number of active COVID-19 cases in Nigeria is 20,769. The top 5 states in Nigeria with more people on admission include Lagos, the epicenter, with 11,298, the FCT with 2,105, Oyo State has 1,031, Ondo has 761, and Delta has 756 patients in its treatment centers. Some of these states still appear on the list of states with high number of COVID-19 deaths in the country. Lagos has recorded 176 confirmed fatalities, followed by Edo State with 68 COVID-19 deaths. Kano has lost 53 people to the virus, Rivers 48, and the Federal Capital Territory has recorded 39 COVID-19 related deaths. Let's talk a little bit more about the issue, the vexed issue, that is, of schools reopening or not. And we're joined via Skype from the Lekki area of Lagos by the Chief Executive Officer of Global International College and co-founder and trustee of the Education Reform and Innovation Team, Mrs. Bolaji Osime. Good evening, Mrs. Osime, and thank you for your time this evening.
Good evening.
Let's begin with the issue of this balance, or if you like, dichotomy between private and public institutions. On one hand, the public institutions say schools shouldn't reopen because of safety concerns. The private ones say they want to reopen because they're ready to comply with the guidelines. Where's the balance here, if there is one to be had?
I think all schools should be ready to open at the same time. I don't think we should separate the public and the private. I think it's very important that government does what it's supposed to do. Some of the schools, a lot of the public schools are overcrowded already. So that's the challenge. And that's not the same thing in the private schools. In most of our schools where we have students about 15 to 20, we observe the national policy of education. But it's not so in the government schools. And that's why the dilemma is, because when they are allowed to go back and there's crowding, then definitely they cannot do social distancing. That's the challenge. And one has to be very careful, because there's a guideline. The government has issued a guideline for all schools. Private schools will have to meet those guidelines, very important, but public schools must meet, because children, these are Nigerian children, we're not discriminating private or public. Everybody must be safe, and that's what I think the issue is. So even if the private schools are ready, government also must fund public schools. They must upgrade the facilities. They must make sure they have water, because that's one of the challenges, to make sure they can wash their hands. They must have thermometers. Government must do what it needs to do. And there's some private schools that are low-income private schools as well that will not be able to do this. So government needs to look at palliatives also for the private sector, because it's been quite tough on so many private schools. Education has really been affected in the last 3 or 4 months, and it's a very vital sector.
There is the question, of course, surrounding what you just talked about, that is the guidelines themselves. Some are saying that, quote and unquote, they are back-breaking. I mean, such things as asking each school to have small but nevertheless functional isolation center for the possibility of cases, an ambulance at the ready, half of previous classes, and so on, beside the things you've already mentioned. And that these are schools that have been, particularly the private ones, closed for 4 months plus, and they don't have the resources to do most of these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the challenge. And that's why I'm saying the government must definitely pay attention to the sector. This is a very important sector. Students have been at home for 4 months. That means there's loss of learning. They haven't been learning. Public schools, they sort of listen to the radio, but, you know, they are not learning as much as they should. So government should do something. In every country that I know, government has participated and they have given palliatives to the private schools and to the government schools. Because the only way we can open, because the important thing is that everybody has to be safe. Teachers have to be safe. For example, if students go back to school now, we all know that students, you know, they don't get that sick, but they can transmit it. When they get home and they have a father or mother that has underlying diseases or whatever, they can pass it on. Even teachers themselves, they can pass it on to the teachers. So it's so important that we pay attention to safety. We have guidelines that covers everybody. For example, now, I know today Ghana did their WAEC exam. That has been a bit of a battle. You know, they did their WAEC exam, but the numbers are growing in Nigeria. We have to look at data in Nigeria to be able to make informed decisions. We can't just say because Ghana did exams, let's just go and do exams. Nigeria is rising. Lagos is rising every time. And we're having so many. Ghana has many recoveries. They have about 26,000, but 20-something thousand has recovered. So they can say that, yes, they're doing something about it. But in our case, we have less than 50% that has recovered. So it's a bit of a worrying situation for school owners. It's also a worrying situation for parents as well, because a lot of parents have spoken to me that they are worried about their children. But at the same time, the flip side of it is that these children have been at home. They have been there for 4 months. It's affecting them. They need to have their exams. But there are alternative exams that they can do. The universities are not open, even if they did the WAEC exams. They're not open for them to go there. They can do the IGCSEs. They can do the GCE. IGCSE, Cambridge has done a powerful thing by just asking us to send the mock results of the students. So when they have the mock results, they give them the grades. So there are alternatives rather than risking the lives of the children. That's the most important thing now, that we must be ready. The data tells us that transmission is high. We don't do data tests. We don't do testing. We're not doing tracing. So how do I know whether Lekki has so many? You know, so that when students come in from the Lekki side, the likelihood is that because the transmission is high, they might come in, and because they don't show the signs, they pass it on to a teacher, and something happened. In Ghana, about a school had 52 students that got the COVID. You know, that's the thing. So the reality of the case is that we need to look at data. We must make sure that we are flattening the curve. We can go online. WAEC needs to start looking at doing online exams. Every other country is doing online exams. So they shouldn't, you know, push us to do something that we will regret at the end of the day. We're going to be watching and seeing what happened in Ghana, but Ghana is different. Every country is different. We need to reduce and flatten the curve, and that's not happening right now. And I think that's why a lot of the state governors, some of them are a little bit worried. And I just saw on channels now that Jigawa says they're not opening. I mean, did you see the state of the school that they showed on TV? And the state of the schools in public sector, they need to be upgraded. A lot of things have to be put in place before they open up. That's so clear. So we cannot open up a side and then forget the other. But if private schools are ready, and the parents are also ready, because the thing is, parents have to take a choice. They have to balance the education as against the risk, you know, because there's a risk there, so they have to balance it. So if parents say to me, I want, definitely if they want their kids to come back, then we will have them back, but we stagger it. Every country is staggering how students come back. It's so important. You can't bring everybody back at the same time. So you stagger it and you make sure you observe social distancing, make sure you have all the equipment, the thermometers, everything that has been written in the Federal Ministry of Education guidelines for schools must be done. There's a 20-page document that they are asking us to use to assess ourselves and for them to come and assess us. And we hope that that can be implemented. That's just a challenge. So we have to really look at this thing very well and say, look, the best for the Nigerian child. So important, so critical. We don't want anybody dying anymore, and we don't want families being affected because we had to go to school.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Osime, Bolaji Osime, Chief Executive, Global International College, joined us via Skype today from Lekki. Thank you so much for your perspectives on this topic.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk to yet another side of the argument in this issue of schools reopening. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to our COVID-19 update. As we said before the break, we're expanding the discussion now to bring in yet another important representative of a very important group of stakeholders, the parents. I'm being joined now via Skype from Victoria Island in Lagos by Very Reverend Olushola Makindikwe, who is first of all, a parent of a graduating student, that's one in SS3. He is also apparently a rector of the Diocese of Lagos School of Missions. Good evening, Reverend Makindikwe. Thank you for your time this evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
Good evening, sir.
Let me start by saying, what do you make? What do you make? What do you make?
I can only hear you faintly.
Okay, let me nevertheless ask the question and see if you catch it. What do you make of this whole argument about whether or not schools should reopen, considering that you're a parent? From the parents' angle, what do you make of it?
Okay, thank you for your question. I think I could hear you faintly. I know it's based on the current pandemic in the city, the COVID-19, and school as a parent and the federal government. The issue is, I don't think schools should be opened for now. I don't think schools should be opened for now because, in my view, most of the school proprietors and the federal government, along with the state government, appear not to be ready. And the fact is that we have to weigh the options, whether to keep our children safe at home or to expose them to the pandemic of COVID-19. Secondly, the recent statement from the federal government of Nigeria that between them and the West African School Examination Council, they are yet to reach an agreement on when the children in the exit year are expected to sit for the exams. It's an indication that the federal government itself is not ready. I know that some school proprietors are trying to push that schools should open, but I would advise that we should not place economy over the health and well-being of our children. These children are the future, and we need to care for them, just like the big hen we care for chicken. That's my view.
Given what you've said, I understand what you've said, and you are also the parent of an SS3 student, which means that that student is supposed to take a graduating exam at this point or sometime during the course of this year. Do you agree with those who say that it is important to allow the students in this category, SS3, JSS3, and those in primary 6, to at least take these exams, and that it can be used as a trial run for all the protocols for COVID-19?
In my view as a parent, I think the need of those in the primary 6 and JSS3 categories can be taken care of because those are internal needs, and they're only moving from government schools in the primary 6 to Form 1 or GSS1, and they're also moving from GSS3 to SS1. Those ones can be taken care of. The one that I believe should be of utmost concern to us are children in the SSS3, because they are moving from the high school to tertiary institutions. And for you to be admitted to any of our tertiary institutions, local and international, you must have a school leaving examination conducted by an external body as it operates in Nigeria and West Africa. So I think that for government and owners of school, they must reach a compromise that will promote the well-being and health of students in the SSS3. And the compromise can come like this. The federal government should further liaise with the West African School Examination Council to set a date for around late August and September. In between the time that the date has been set, government should go around to inspect schools, both public and private, to see that social distancing is maintained and at the same time, water, hand sanitizers and everything that will promote health is also put in place. But we must also note that when the federal government said they are not ready, they are talking from their own point of view, which is legitimate. Let me give an example. Queen's College is in Lagos, where I reside here. From information that I have, Queen's College has a total of 500 girls in the SSS3 category. And these girls come from the 6 geographical zones of Nigeria. Implies somebody come from Kanuri land, traveling all the way to Lagos. You don't know what that girl has encountered. You don't know who brought her here. So they are talking from the point of view that they are not ready, which is a good indication. But then it's an indication that our healthcare system is not as wholesome as we expected. So between stakeholders and parents of education, things must be done. But we have to be careful so that those in the SS3 category do not totally lose out. If care is not taken, our educational system may be drawn back by 6 months or a year. But I will agree that for the SS3 category, things should be done to their own benefit so that these girls and boys will sit for their final exams within the next 8 weeks. That's my view.
Very Reverend Olushola Makidikwe, thank you so much for your perspectives on this very important topic. Reverend Makidikwe joined us via Skype from Victoria Island in Lagos. Thank you so much for your time this evening. The Imo State government is already having discussions with parents and school management to see how best and fast schools can reopen, especially for students in graduating classes. Our correspondent, Itokwe Kutei, has more.
Just as the federal government is thinking out a better and safer way for schools to resume, especially for students in graduating classes, the Imo State government, on the other hand, is seeking ways to ensure that schools resume ahead of the WAEC examination. The State Commissioner for Information and Strategy, Declan Emelumba, disclosed this after the State Executive Council meeting at the Government House in Owerri. He said the government is putting modalities in place to ensure that all COVID-19 protocols are strictly adhered to, and the government will meet with parents and school management to find a way out.
The government is determined to make sure that these are children in examination classes, particularly WAEC and other examination classes, do not miss the opportunity of writing the exams this year. To this end, the government has set up criteria for the resumption of schools very soon so that the children can write the exams after meeting with parents and Parents Teachers Association. Topmost in this is to ensure that all safety protocol concerning the COVID is maintained while the students write the exams. Most importantly, all the schools are going to be fumigated, and while the exams are on, government will appoint supervisors to make sure that they observe this COVID protocol.
The chairman of the COVID-19 task force in Imo State, Professor Morisiwu, said even though schools are planning to resume, but he wants the government and the school management to use this period of the COVID-19 pandemic to take advantage of what technology offers the education sector.
The Imo State, as I said, we have 2 options. One option that has been canvassed is for us to allow the students to come and take the exams and go. Another option is the fact that we are trying to take all the measures that have been spelled out by NCDC and other agencies, and then we open. So we don't have a fixed date yet. But the challenge, which is thinking outside the box, the school as we know it has changed. So we are encouraging people to look outside the classroom, to see how they can go online, to see how they can open up the school space. Then let us also look at the opportunities the pandemic has really offered us. Those opportunities we should grab.
According to the NCDC, as of today, Imo State has recorded 452 confirmed cases of COVID-19 with 360 active cases, and 83 persons have been discharged so far with 9 fatalities. From Owerri, the Imo State capital, Eyitope Kuteyi for COVID-19 update.
Let's take the discussion to a consultant public health physician who is also a stakeholder in the education sector. Joining us via Skype from the Ikoyi area of Lagos is Dr. Alero Roberts, senior lecturer at the Department of Maternal and Child Health at the University of Lagos. Good evening, Dr. Roberts. As always, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
We seem not to be able to leave this issue quite behind. The last time I spoke to you about this subject, we didn't have the 52 pages of guidelines that the federal government now says will guide this process that will eventually lead to the reopening at some point. How adequate do you think these guidelines are as set by the government?
Well, I haven't read them completely, but I did take a glance through when I was told I was coming on to speak about this. And they do look very, very comprehensive. In fact, I was actually quite proud to see that they had set out such a comprehensive standard of operation, standard of processing for the preparation of schools. As Winston Churchill said, laddie, we should never waste a good crisis. And this is the opportunity that government has to actually invest in the education sector now and bring schools up to standard, help the proprietors to bring schools up to standard.
Given the situation we do have, though, I'm sure you've been following the debate back and forth. There's been dichotomy between private and public schools on the issue of preparedness. There's been the problem with the young stars, those in the junior parts of the schooling system, and the impossibility of keeping them away from each other, as well as the question of facilities, health and otherwise, and all of that. What do you make of all this? Does this give you the impression that this might be long in coming? We might have some difficulty with eventually getting this through.
Well, we have to, the longest journey in the world begins with the first step. And this is our opportunity to take the first step. We have long debated this issue of the dichotomy between public and private schools. And a situation like this, COVID-19, has just further widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots and the digital divide. The truth of the matter is that whether schools open or don't open, learning must go on. And this is an opportunity to leverage on the public-private partnerships, such as we have done in the health sector, to do same in the educational sector, make sure that the children can still get access to learning. There's a lot of unused capacity right now in private companies and in banks, and it's a good idea that the school proprietors, the government, local and state, should liaise with these corporate bodies to see whether they can expand the space. I think that was what the immediate past speaker was just talking about, to expand the spaces so that children can use up unused space, to make data available, to increase bandwidth so that more and more children can get online. I know that there are quite a few donor agencies and whatnot that have been involved in giving out cheap and easy devices for children to learn. We should take advantage of these things. There are so many opportunities that are available. This is not new. But what we do need is more out-of-the-box thinking. I agree. There are just too many what's, ifs, and maybes about opening the school premises. But there are so many other ways by which we can leverage on the fact that learning must continue, once we are committed to the fact that learning must continue.
Before I let you go, I must then ask about this, because right now the challenge is deciding whether or not to do a test run of some sort. We did that with the aviation sector. We've done that with some level of markets and so on. In the case of the schools, there are those who are arguing that graduating students, SS3, GSS3, and Primary 6 should be used for this purpose, because they are limited in number and they're passing through to new classes, as it were. Do you think that's a good idea?
In principle, it is a good idea, but I think that there are other issues that need to be examined, like the previous person said. I mean, if you have a school like Queen's College in Lagos and a girl coming from the Kanuri region, does she have to come all the way to Lagos to write to write the exam? These exams can be done online. So if the government will commit, that state and local and federal will commit to making logistics available for her and children like her where they are, to sit these exams where they are, the child does not need to get onto some dodgy public transport and come down to Lagos just to take an exam. So there are things that we can do once we are committed to the fact that learning has to continue.
Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for your perspective on this issue. I do know that at some point, not too far in the future, we'll be back to it again because it doesn't look like it's going anywhere soon. It's been a good day for scientists as a number of vaccines are proving promising in helping against COVID-19. Earlier in the day, we reported a vaccine developed by the University of Oxford appears to be safe and trains the immune system. Phase 1 trials involving over 1,000 people showed the injection led to them making antibodies and white blood cells that help fight coronaviruses. Researchers say the findings are hugely promising, but that it is still too soon to know if it is enough to offer protection. Meanwhile, an experimental coronavirus vaccine being developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University has also been found to be safe and produced an immune response in early-stage clinical trials. The vaccine did not prompt any serious side effect and elicited antibody and T-cell immune responses, with the strongest response seen in people who received 2 doses. The project, though, is still at an early stage. In light of these developments, British officials say they have signed a deal to buy 90 million doses of the experimental vaccines being developed by the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, BioNTech, and another experimental vaccine researched by Valneva. One country for which that might be good news is South Africa, where as the country struggles to deal with a rapidly rising number of COVID infections, more voices have joined the call to close all schools till the peak has passed. The number of confirmed cases in South Africa is averaging 13,000 daily. The death toll crossed the 5,000 mark on the weekend, and for some schools, more pupils resumed school today. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, takes us through the update.
Meetings have been ongoing between the Department of Basic Education and about 5 teachers' unions in the country. The unions want schools shut down till the surge in COVID infection numbers abates. The department has been going ahead with the phased reopening of schools. But the picture is there's a high level of absenteeism, a high number of infections, deaths and recoveries of pupils and learners alike in the education sector, although the Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, says there's no proof that this is linked to the reopening of schools. While some parents have braved it to send learners back to school, many are still questioning why young children should be exposed to likely infection at this time.
I think it's not a good idea to open schools, whereas these are kids. Kids are not cautious, kids are not careful.
I'm really scared. I'm scared. I can't bring my daughter to school. I can't. There's nothing that we can do. As they say, they must come back to school and resume. Then yes, she must come back to school.
I think it's a wrong approach. The government must close all the schools.
Dr. Vukosi Marivati of the University of Pretoria is a data scientist and a member of the Gauteng Provincial Advisory Council on COVID-19.
In terms of the numbers, we know that when we look at the distribution of who has passed away in terms of the ages from COVID, young children or children of school-going age are not really as affected. So in some ways, countries are trying to look at, okay, can we save the academic year so that students can go back to school? In South Africa also, we have things like feeding schemes. So you have children who are vulnerable, who now when schools were closed, then couldn't get their meals. And this has bigger impact. So you don't really want people to end up dying because of COVID, even though they never had COVID. And this is a challenge that we have. And we're trying to weigh up all these things. How safe are the teachers at the schools? How safe are their family members, where we know that they still might, there could be spread because of the learners going to school amongst each other.
For now, more classes like grades 1 to 3 have returned to school in some areas of some provinces, including in the COVID epicenter, Gauteng, while government decides. The department has passed the buck to Cabinet and the National COVID Command Council for the final say. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Betty joins us now via Skype from Johannesburg. Good evening, Betty. Trust that you're staying safe out there. Give us more of this. Give us more of what the update is about this. Opening, closing, infections, arguments back and forth. Where are we with all of this?
Well, the arguments are still going on. We don't have a final say yet. Probably some meetings have taken place between the Basic Education Ministry and or the Department of Basic Education and all these other unions. Some meetings have taken place within government, within cabinet. So we're waiting to hear the outcome of the meeting. Probably tomorrow we'll hear, probably not. But the funny thing is that some levels of school began today. And so if by Thursday or Wednesday, the president says, or the cabinet says, look, we're going to close, then they close again. So it's very untidy. And in other areas, still in Gauteng, you have those who are in grade 3 who started a bit earlier, and they were told not to come, no reason. So it's still it's a very untidy picture, and the debates are going on. Some of the South African Democratic Teachers Union is saying, why don't you try the online platforms, try broadcast media, radio, TV, and teach them. Let's assess them with what they've done in the first term between January and March, and probably return to school October, November. We assess them. At that point, we're not saying pass everyone, but you'll be able to know a child that is educationally healthy enough to move to the next class. You have the Association of Professional Teachers saying, look, try and save the academic year by saving reading and writing and mathematics, for example, and keep the children safe. So it's argument after argument. We'll definitely hear something by this week, because many parents, you have parents going to some schools and locking up the gates and saying, we want our children, we don't want any child going to school. And the committee or the Council of Education Ministers or the education departments in the country are saying, if you keep doing that, the disruptions, allow those who want to go to school, else we will sue. And those protesting are saying they're undeterred. But it's still, we're still waiting to hear the final say from Cabinet.
The pandemic itself, of course, presents for you a different problem. Because while the numbers continue to rise, as you've reported, the health authorities and indeed the government itself is struggling to cope with this.
Yes, that's true. And they're doing, the health minister, I don't know how he copes, but he's everywhere trying to check capability or the improvements for all the different places. But unfortunately, you have a place like Khayelitsha where a 1-week-old treatment center for COVID patients was burnt down by people protesting over land or space to build, living places. So there's so many issues going on. And then people who are, disobeying all the restrictions. You have the health minister who now sent out a letter. I haven't seen that before. Sent out a letter of appeal to people to just help support all that government is doing. So it's a tough task being in government at this point for the government here, dealing with so many things, people not obeying, people burning up places that are meant to treat people, and then the issue of the school and a lot of other things. People protesting over the ban on alcohol, although the minister says since that ban was placed this week that the number of cases at the trauma units have really dropped, giving them more space and time to direct attention to improving their capability to deal with the issue of COVID.
I've got just a minute to ask you this. Going forward there, how is this going to play out? Because even though Gauteng is one of the hotspots, there are other hotspots whose numbers are not necessarily coming down either. How is the government hoping to tackle that?
Well, all they've been saying is still focusing on community spread. That's how they've been tackling it, somewhere along the line. The issue of prevention in the first place, meaning appealing to people, mobilizing community leaders to ensure that their people adhere to the restrictions, adhere to the regulations. So it's prevention at the community level to reduce the spread. Prevention before you get to the point of for treatment or overwhelming the system already in place.
Thank you very much, Betty. Do continue to stay safe out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, you too.
That's the program for tonight. Remember, you can get more updates on the COVID-19 pandemic and other top stories on our website, channelstv.com. There you'll find the details of the story on the 2 COVID-19 vaccine candidates that have shown some promises in 2 separate clinical trials. Thank you for watching. Do join us again tomorrow at noon, 6 and 9 p.m. I'm Ladi Akredulu.